Mary Tyler Moore was born in Flatbush, Brooklyn on December 29, 1936. Moore's family relocated to California when she was 8. Her childhood was troubled, due in part to her mother's alcoholism. The eldest of 3 siblings, she attended a Catholic high school and married upon her graduation in 1955. Her only child, Richard Meeker Jr., was born soon after. A dancer at first, Moore's first break in show business was in 1955 as a dancing kitchen appliance. Happy Hot Point, the Hot Point appliance elf, in commercials generally broadcast during the popular sitcom The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, 1952. She then shifted from dancing to acting, and work soon came, at first a number of guest roles on television series, but eventually a recurring role as Sam, Richard Diamond's sultry answering service girl, on Richard Diamond, Private Detective, 1957, her performance being particularly notorious because her legs, usually dangling a pump on her toe, were shown instead of her face. Although these early roles often took advantage of her willowy charms, in particular her famously beautiful dancer's legs, Moore's career soon took a more substantive turn as she was cast in 2 of the most highly regarded comedies in television history, which would air first run for most of the 60s and 70s. In the first of these, The Dick Van Dyke Show, 1961, Moore played Laura Petrie, the charmingly loopy wife of star Dick Van Dyke. The show became famous for its very clever writing and terrific comic ensemble. Moore and her fellow performers received multiple Emmy Awards for their work. Meanwhile, she had divorced her first husband and married advertising man and, later, network executive, Grant Tinker. After the end of The Dick Van Dyke Show, 1961, Moore focused on movie making, co-starring in 5 between the end of the sitcom and the start of The Mary Tyler Moore Show, 1970, including Thoroughly Modern Millie, 1967, in which she plays a ditzy aspiring actress, and an inane Elvis Presley vehicle, Change of Habit, 1969, in which she plays a nun-to-be and love interest for Presley. Also included in this mixed bag of films was a first-rate television movie, Run a Crooked Mile, 1969, which was an early showcase for Moore's considerable talent at dramatic acting. After trying her hand at movies for a few years, Moore decided, rather reluctantly, to return to television, but on her terms. The result was The Mary Tyler Moore Show, 1970, which was produced by MTM Enterprises, a company she had formed with Tinker, and which later went on to produce scores of other television series. Moore starred as Mary Richards, who moves to Minneapolis on the heels of a failed relationship. Mary finds work at the newsroom of WJM-TV, whose news program is the lowest rated in the city, and establishes fast friendships with her colleagues and her neighbors. The sitcom was a commercial and critical success, and for years was a fixture of CBS Television's unbeatable Saturday night lineup. Moore and Tinker were determined from the start to make the sitcom a cut above the average, and it certainly was. Instead of going for a barrage of gags, the humor took longer to develop and arose out of the interaction between the characters in more realistic situations. This was also one of the earliest television portrayals of a woman who was happy and successful on her own, rather than simply being a man's wife. The Mary Tyler Moore Show, 1970, is generally included amongst the finest television series ever produced in America. Moore ended the sitcom in 1977, while it was still on a high point, but found it difficult to flee the beloved Mary Richards persona. Her subsequent attempts at television series, variety programs, and specials, such as the mortifying disco-era Mary's Incredible Dream, 1976, usually failed, but even her dramatic work, which is generally excellent, fell under the shadow of Mary Richards. With time, however, her body of dramatic acting came to be recognized on its own, with such memorable work as in Ordinary People, 1980, as an aloof vieille mother who not so secretly resents her younger son's survival, in Finnegan Begin Again, 1985, as a middle-aged widow who finds love with a man whose wife is slowly slipping away. In Lincoln, 1988, as the troubled Mary Todd Lincoln, and in Stolen Babies, 1993, as an infamous baby smuggler, for which she won her 6th Emmy Award. She also inspired a new appreciation for her famed comic talents in Flirting with Disaster, 1996, in which she is hilarious as the resentful adoptive mother of a son who is seeking his birth parents. Moore also acted on Broadway, and she won a Tony Award for her performance in Whose Life Is It Anyway? Widely acknowledged as being much tougher and more high-strung than her iconic image would suggest. Moore had a life with more than the normal share of ups and downs. Both of her siblings predeceased her sister Elizabeth of a drug overdose in 1978, and her brother John of cancer in 1991, after a failed attempt at assisted suicide, Moore having been the assistant. Moore's troubled son Richie shot and killed himself in what was officially ruled an accident in 1980. Moore was diagnosed an insulin-dependent diabetic in 1969 and had a bout with alcoholism in the early 1980s. Divorced from Tinker in 1981, after repeated separations and reconciliations, she married physician Robert Levine in 1983. The union with Levine proved to be Moore's longest run in matrimony and her only marriage not to end in divorce. Despite the opening credits of The Mary Tyler Moore Show, 1970, in which she throws a package of meat into her shopping cart, Moore was a vegetarian and a proponent of animal rights. She was an active spokesperson for both diabetes issues and animal rights. On January 25, 2017, Mary Tyler Moore died at age 80 at Greenwich Hospital in Greenwich, Connecticut, from cardiopulmonary arrest complicated by pneumonia after having been placed on a respirator the previous week. She was laid to rest during a private ceremony at Oak Lawn Cemetery in Fairfield, Connecticut. Mrs. Mary Tyler Moore, he still feels her love 6 years after death, married Dr. 15 years younger than him. Recently, Mary Tyler Moore's husband shared their love story. Even though they were 15 years apart in age, he won her heart after she lost her only child. 6 years after her passing, he still remembers her and refers to her as My Mary. Mary Tyler Moore was the star of her own program, The Mary Tyler Moore Show, but over the years, she also appeared in a number of other productions. She appeared as an actor in Rhonda, The Dick Van Dyke Show, and Ordinary People. The husband of Moore has now spoken up about how they met and his thoughts on their enduring love tale. Despite having a considerable age disparity, the couple stayed joyfully in love. Moore passed away in 2017, but her husband has continued to talk about what they meant to one another and how their love grew through time, keeping Moore's legacy alive all these years. Moore and Dr. Robert Levine, her husband, happened to cross paths one day. Despite the fact that he was 15 years her junior, their romance developed very rapidly. On their first date, Dr. Levine claimed he felt they would have a great relationship since it was simple and over time. Moore acknowledged that she had already been married before, but claimed that Dr. Levine was her first real love. By working with the Mary Tyler Moore Vision Initiative, which seeks to develop a treatment for the diabetes-related difficulties Moore had, Dr. Levine is now carrying on his late wife's legacy. Moore was a sufferer of diabetes. Moore's love story. How did it develop? Moore's life and her relationship with her husband, who has given numerous interviews since the documentary's debut, are examined in a recently released documentary. Although spending 3 decades together, the couple's romance was unplanned. Moore's mother became ill one evening and required medical attention. Dr. Levine was available. While Dr. Levine was smitten with Moore, he did not consider her to be a celebrity because he was unaware of the popularity of her TV series. Dr. Levine advised her to call him if she had any needs as he was leaving her home. When Moore questioned whether acute loneliness was a sufficient cause for needing him, the man replied that it was. Shortly after, Moore called the man at that hour. Dr. Levine noted that he was attending medical school at the time and didn't have time to watch television on Saturdays. But their bond rapidly developed into something unique for each of them. Moore admitted repeatedly that Dr. Levine was her first true love, despite the fact that she had already been married twice. Dr. Levine acknowledged that Moore's perception of him in that way made him feel honored. Video from Moore's bridal shower, when she spoke about Dr. Levine making her a tuna fish sandwich, was one of the moments in the documentary that demonstrated the couple's love for one another. Dr. Levine had created the sandwich specifically for her without considering himself, which is why Moore believed it was so remarkable. Moore thought that Dr. Levine's first demonstration of true affection. Prior to the documentary's debut, Dr. Levine had never viewed the footage, but he stated, "When this happens, the person you love may wake up in the middle of the night with a hunger pang. What do you do then? You go to the kitchen and prepare something for them." She claims that is when she discovered how much she loved me. In order to portray Moore's narrative as she would have wanted it to be told, Dr. Levine, one of the film's executive producers, combed through hours of footage stashed in the basement. She was still with him every day, he claimed, referring to her as "my Mary." Dr. Levine explained that the reason the movie was titled Being Mary Tyler Moore was because Moore always acted genuinely and unapologetically, which at the time was groundbreaking. What challenges overcame Moore? While Moore and Dr. Levine enjoyed many happy years together, Moore also had her share of professional and personal challenges. When she found out that her 24-year-old son had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound in 1980, it was her first major setback. His demise was determined to be accidental. Grant Tinker, Moore's at the time divorced husband, called Moore around 5 in the morning to deliver the devastating news. He informed her that she should sit down if she was standing before informing her that their son had passed away. Moore's son Richie was cremated, and the celebrity scattered his ashes in the Californian Owens River. Moore reminisced about that day and said, "I squatted down over the clear, deep water. I cracked open the container and threw everything inside into the water. What was supposed to be a prayer turned into a furious demand. I yelled, 'You take care of him,' to the sky." Moore was hospitalized for pneumonia and put on a ventilator before she passed away. Her diabetes was the cause of every ailment she experienced in the days before she passed away. She passed away while being accompanied by her family, friends, and her husband of 33 years at the time, Dr. Levine. Moore developed diabetes as a youngster, and by the time of her death, she had almost completely lost her vision. Even the visitors who had come to wish her well were unfamiliar to her. In addition to the physical hardships she faced, Moore battled alcoholism. But despite everything, her spouse remained by her side and made an effort to express how much she meant to him in the film. He said he wanted people to recognize her significance and influence on the world. Additionally, he wished to inspire people to emulate Moore in their own lives. Dr. Levine saw that his wife had never been one to back down from a struggle, and he believed that everyone should follow suit. Together with Moore, he advocated for people to speak up for themselves. Even though she would be dying, her loved ones and friends were nevertheless as stunned when the time came as if she had passed away suddenly. Her husband and her family still have great memories of her now. She was a truly inspiring individual. Thanks for watching my video.